Hey brothers and sisters, we're just continuing our Gideon study here a little bit, and we finished the last section off. It was the end of chapter 6, and these last few verses I pointed at something. I said I wasn't exactly sure what was being pointed to, and it was these verses here. Behold, I will put fleece of wool in the floor, and if the dew be on the fleece only, and it be dry upon all the earth beside, then I shall know that thou wilt save Israel by my hand, as thou hast said. And it was so. And he rose up early in the morrow and thrust the fleece together and wringed out dew out of the fleece in a bowl full of water. And Gideon said unto God, Let not thy anger be hot against me. I will speak, but this once let me prove, I pray, but this once with the fleece, let it now be dry upon the fleece, and upon the ground let there be dew. And so God did so that night. For it was dry upon the fleece only, and there was dew on all the ground. And I just kind of said, well, dew can be a symbol of the resurrection, and the fleece, I speculated, maybe pointed to, since it was wool, the lamb, Jesus. And I think that's about right. Let's just take a quick look at the definitions here. The primary usage of dew refers to the morning and nighttime mist. Dew was important in the ancient Near East because the climate was so dry that a lot of times the dew was the only thing that kept the crops in the field alive, and so the primary symbolism is a blessing. But specifically here we've got the second definition is the one that I remember from other studies. Second, dew is a symbol of the resurrection. In Isaiah 26:19, just as the earth brings forth its dew, so also it shall bring forth the dead to new life. Thus dew is a symbol of the redeemed and resurrected people of God. God's saints are those that are raised with Christ in baptism and thus become partakers of the first resurrection. Dew is a fitting reminder of our baptism into Christ's death, resurrection, since it's pictured by the renewal of the earth and the washing of regeneration. And so I just want to point out here, first the test was that the dew would be on the wool and not on the ground. And then the dew was on the ground and not on the wool. And I think we're getting a little foreshadowing here if you look into it. The resurrection was first Jesus, because the wool representing the lamb and the dew representing the resurrection. So the resurrection was first Jesus, and then it was his people. I just thought that was neat. So I wanted to go back and hit that before we get into Judges 7. You know, Gideon is jam-packed. I think I'm on my 4th video here, and I've only got the first chapter done. So thanks for hanging with there. I hope there's a little series of blessings here as we're going through, because like I say, when I read the commentaries, I would say half of what I'm pulling out here, what the Lord's showing me, wasn't in the commentaries that I was taking a look at. And not that I'm any whiz bang, but it's just, if you apply some of those hermeneutics that I was pointing to earlier, these passages pop right out of the Bible. And that's why I'm so fired up by doing these Bible studies. It's a miracle what God did here for us in terms of what's in the Bible. So that's why we're in here. Chapter 7, then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, right? That's the name they gave him after he ripped down the altar of Baal that his father had built. And all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Herod, which in Hebrew, Herod means trembling. So they're picture this as they've got Gideon's clans that he called with the horn, and he brought in tens of thousands of people, and they're by the well of Herod, which meant trembling. And so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me, and give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, my own hand hath saved me. Now, the last couple of videos I did here, I was using the ISV version because the English was easier. You guys know I'm a big fan of King James, and I tend to stay with that, but the ISV took edits also from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so I'm just testing it out. I think it's probably a pretty good translation. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go with that to the end of this video series and just see how I feel about it at the end. And I apologize for flipping back there. I was checking between versions. You guys know that's a good way of doing things anyways. Okay, so Gideon was told that he had called in too many soldiers, and if they had defeated the Midianites, Israel would become arrogant and say, it was my own abilities that delivered me, even though the folks that Gideon called in were vastly outnumbered, and we're going to learn that. That's why to ask in full view of the soldiers, whoever is afraid or is trembling may go back from Mount Gilead and return home. So 22,000 soldiers left and 10,000 remained. And so you had Gideon called in 32,000 soldiers. We're going to find out in a minute here that the Midianites and the Amalekites were several times more than that. And now God is sending them home. He's sending home the ones that are afraid or trembling, okay? And then God saw that with 10,000 remained, there are still too many soldiers, the Lord told Gideon. So bring them down to the water, and I'll refine them for you there. Therefore, when I say to you, this one will be going with you, and he will go with you, but no one may go about whom I tell you. This one won't be going with you. So he brought the soldiers down to the water, and the Lord told Gideon, you are to call out everyone who laps up water with his tongue like a dog, and from everyone who kneels to drink. So there's the separating one. You got those lapping like a dog, and you got those that kneel to drink. The contingent of soldiers who lapped water with their hands to their mouths numbered 300 men, but everyone else kneeled to drink. So the lapping ones were 300, and presumably then you had 9,700 others that kneeled down to drink. Now, I went through a handful of commentaries, and this is one of those situations, kind of like the dew on the fleece that we just got done with in chapter 6, where it's just strange enough, where God must be doing something. And so I took a look at the commentaries here, and there was two interpretations of this lapping like a dog versus kneeling down to drink. And the two interpretations were, it means nothing. It was just the way that God called the troops for Gideon. And I got that out of John MacArthur, and I can't remember, I think one other. And then I read a couple of commentaries that said, no, the thing that you should look at is the ones that kneeled because they were wise. When kneeling to drink, they could hold their shield and their sword still and be ready for a fight. And so they were, God was taking a look at that versus the other ones. And so that was interesting, and I prayed about it. I was asking the Lord, what's the deal? Because the one he kept, the 300 he kept, were the lapping like tongues like a dog. And I thought, well, that's just plain odd. And so, this isn't genius, but God put it in my heart. Go look at what a dog meant in the Bible. Pretty obvious, right? So a dog is a keleb. References to dog in the Old Testament, New Testament, usually a contemptuous character. A dog, and especially a dead dog, is used as a figure of insignificance. And then we get the example, Goliath says to David, am I a dog that thou come out to me with staves. And so the point is it was the lowest level ridicule you could do to somebody, is to liken them to a dog. And so I thought, wow, this is a real blessing here. So if you look at what's going on, Gideon called first 32,000 soldiers, and yet God said that's too many. Even though he's going to send them up against 135,000 Amalekites and Midianites. 35,000 for Israel, or 32,000 was too many. And so he said, okay, send away those that are afraid. That was 22,000 took off. 10,000 remained. And God said, hey, that's still too many. Bring them down to the water in the brook, and those that lap like a dog are the ones that stay. And so it went from 10,000 down to 300 people. And what's this modeling for us? Well, God was saying that if you have too many people, Israel would become arrogant and say it was my own abilities that delivered me, not, God, presumably. And so that's the theme. God's whittling this away until it's painfully obvious that it's only God. And the very last culling here of taking just the ones that lap like dogs is showing us that the ones that were left were the lowest, positioned, most pitiful people left, because that's what the dog represents in the Bible symbolically, is the lowest, most pitiful person. And so God left Gideon with 300 lowest, most pitiful people out of this massive army. So I thought that was just fantastic, because it's right in the theme. There's no way that they're going to brag saying it was my own abilities that delivered me, when what Gideon was left with were basically what you'd identify as the most pitiful 300 out of the 32,000 that originally showed up. So I hope that's another little Bible study blessing for you guys, because I think that was just fantastic. Okay, so he brought the soldiers down. He called out everyone that lapped up the water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, I'm going to deliver you with the 300 soldiers who lapped by giving the Midianites into your control. Send everyone else back to their homes. So there they go. So the soldiers took provisions with them along with their trumpets, and Gideon sent all the rest of the soldiers of Israel back to their own tents, but retained the 300 men, and the Midian encampment was below him in the valley. Later that night the Lord directed Gideon, get up and go down to the Midianite encampment, because I have given it into your control. But if you're afraid, go down there and take your servant Purah with you to their encampment, where you will hear what they are talking about. That way you'll be encouraged to attack the encampment. So he and his servant Purah went down to the perimeter outpost of the encampment army. The Midianites and Amalekites and a certain group from the east lay encamped in the valley as thick as locusts. The number of the camels couldn't be calculated. They seemed to be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a soldier was talking to a friend about a dream. Look, he was saying, I had a dream. It went like this. A loaf of barley bread rolled into the Midianite encampment, came to a tent, collided with it. The loaf of bread fell down, turned upside down, and the tent collapsed. Then his friend replied, can this be anything else than the sword of Joash's son Gideon, the man from Israel? God must have given Midian the entire encampment into his control. And just to note, some more interesting picturing here. Why is it a loaf of barley bread? Well, barley bread was the cheap grain in Israel, and so barley bread was again pointing to Gideon possibly being of this lowly state, but he's the one that crushes the camp of the Midianites. Second thing you get is another little interesting imaging here is Christ, in 1 Corinthians 15, Christ was the first fruits of those from the dead, and the Feast of First Fruits was celebrated right there after Passover on Resurrection Day, and it was the first fruits of the barley harvest. And so is that maybe also foreshadowing a little bit? Um, you know, Jesus said he would go before the Israelites into their battles, and I sort of suspect that this is just one more foreshadowing of that's what's really going on here, is the barley bread rolling in. Okay. When Gideon heard the tale of the dream and the interpretation, he bowed down to worship and then returned to the Israeli encampment. Then he separated the 300 men into 3 companies and gave them each trumpets to carry, along with jars into which he placed lit torches. He instructed them, watch me and do what I do, and then when they came to the outer perimeter of the encampment, do what I do. When I sound the trumpet, accompanied by everyone who is with me, you must blow your trumpets all around the entire encampment, and then shout for the Lord and for Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men with him arrived at the outer perimeter of the encampment at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had posted sentries. They blew their trumpets and smashed the jars that they were carrying in their hands. So now this is really cool. When the 3 companies sounded their trumpets and broke their jars, they held the torches in their left hands and sounded their trumpets with their right. Then they cried out, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Again, anything that seems a little strange is worth a little secondary investigation. Let me just show you something here. Hang on. Okay, I've flipped over to the King James Version with the Strong's references because I wanted to show you something. Now here they don't say jars, they say pitchers is what the torches were in. And I just wanted to show you, Hebrew word is kad, from the unused root meaning to deepen, properly a pail, but generally earthenware, a jar for domestic purposes, okay? So it's earthenware or clay, right? And so what I want to do is have you think about this a little bit. So God uses that example with his people saying, will the pot say to the potter, why have you made me this way? God's people are represented as the clay pots. And so what are we getting here? A little foreshadowing. The jars are smashed, and then the torches were inside that they're carrying. So, you know, if we take that symbology, the clay pots were broken, and after they've been broken, the light shines forth. There's your born again experience. You know, you have to be broken and surrender to Christ, and then your light shines forth. So it's just amazing in here in Gideon. There's just almost every 2-3 passages here is just a hidden gem. I just love this section of the Bible back here. Okay, so let's keep on going here. Okay, so when the companies sounded the trumpets and they broke the jars, they held the torches in the left hand. Okay, we read that, and the trumpets in the right, and they gave that yell, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. They stood up, each soldier in his assigned place surrounding the encampment, and the entire army ran away, sounding alarm to retreat. The 300 trumpets being sounded, the Lord turned the swords of the Midianite soldiers against one another throughout the entire army, and they ran away as far as Beth Shida in the direction of Zerua. They got as far as the outskirts of Abel Maola near Tabith. Okay, so here this is cool. We speculate up above that the barley rolling into the camp not only represented Gideon in terms of the barley being the least valuable grain, but also that Jesus was the first fruits that came out of the barley harvest. Well, now I said, you know, is that the Lord going before him? And then what do we see here in verse 22? As they blew the 300 trumpets, the Lord turned the swords of the Midianite soldiers against one another. So the Lord is fighting for Gideon. Gideon really isn't doing much. um, so the Israeli soldiers called out from the territories of Naphtali, Asher, and throughout Manasseh, and they chased after the Midianites. Okay, Gideon dispatched messengers throughout the mountainous region of Ephraim, notifying them, come down to fight Midian, capture the water crossing as far as Beth-bara and the Jordan River before they can get to them. They captured two Midianite leaders, Oreb and Zeeb, while they were pursuing the Midianites, and executed Oreb on Oreb's rock and Zeeb on Zeeb's winepress. And then they carried the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon, to the east bank of the Jordan River. And so something dynamite's going to happen here in Judges 8 with who Oreb and Zeeb are, but we can't get there until we get there. So we did Judges 7 all in one shot here, but hopefully you're just as impressed as I am. We got this fantastic look at how God positions these miracles, saying that there's no way anybody's going to claim the glory except for he himself. And he did that by calling them down to just the dead, to just the dogs, going with Gideon into a battle. And then we saw some fantastic, foreshadowing there with the barley loaf rolling into the camp. And then we saw the broken clay pots with the light lamps coming inside of them. And so, like I say, I think Gideon is just a barn burner Bible study. Thanks, Saints, and we'll close her off. Probably one more to get through chapter 8, but hope you're enjoying it so far.